All right, let's get cooking. Welcome to the latest edition of Chin Check Sports Radio. I'm your host, JD. I want to thank you all for taking the time out to join us. And as always, we welcome any suggestions, feedback, comments, and criticisms, which improves the quality of our program, which ultimately improves your listening experience. Before we get started, we want to send all of you I thank you for your tremendous support. Again, people are slowly finding out about who we are, what we do, and they respect and enjoy the passion with which we speak. As we stated before, we do this because we enjoy doing it, and we are slowly starting to build our listening armies to take over the airwaves. Now, on this particular episode, I kind of have been bull-jiving, waiting around, haven't even done our preview of a true fantasy matchup that has already been discussed from other sources. Of course, we're going to do our review. The fight was announced maybe about a month or two ago. Of course, we kept our eye on it. We have advertised on our Twitter account that we were going to do a preview broadcast, but we just been playing. We just haven't done it. Now, the last couple of days, I have been getting into good exchanges with people discussing this fight. So now the fact that I've been discussing this fight with people on Twitter, it's time for us to do our preview on a true generational fantasy matchup actually come to life. And that's going to be the all-time great Manny Pacquiao versus Errol "The Truth" Spence. Now, as fans of the program, you guys have listened to us break down a lot of fantasy matchups, obviously between fighters of different eras, or in some cases, fighters of the same era, same generation who never fought one another. This fight is one of those generational fantasy matchups that people would have talked about if they never fought. And the reason why, Pacquiao already of locked to be a Hall of Famer, considered by some, I would even say by many, as their all-time favorite fighter or the best fighter of this particular generation. I tend to lean towards Floyd Mayweather against Errol Spence, who is slowly starting to establish himself as the best welterweight in the post-Mayweather era. So this is one of those fights that if they were not fighting on Saturday, August 21st, this is something that people would be talking about, and we would actually be doing a fantasy matchup on these two combatants. But it is actually going to happen, and it's interesting because, you know, boxing got a bit of a jolt this summer. A little bit of a disappointment with the Deontay Wilder-Tyson Fury 3 fight that hasn't postponed to October the 9th. Again, our preview show of that fight is still on the channel, so please go check it out. And then we got word that this fight is set in stone, and folks, we're talking less than a month away. So we're definitely excited for this fight. But of course, we must do our preview for this action. So let's go to the tail of the tape and the history of these guys. Manny Pacquiao, at the age of 42 years old, standing 5'6" in height. Folks, this man has fought at flyweight, super bantamweight, featherweight, super featherweight, lightweight, light welterweight, welterweight, and light middleweight. So we're talking this man starting his career as small as can be to eventually work his way up. And by the way, flyweight is between 108 pounds up to 112 pounds. So put that in perspective. Then fighting at super bantamweight, which is 118 and 122. Featherweight, which is another golden division. Then super featherweight, so he's fighting his way up through the ranks. So let's just talk about some key fights in Pacquiao's career. Now, we're going to try not to get too in-depth because we already did this when we did our review of Manny Pacquiao's career as our number 2 ranked fighter of all time. So we're going to just briefly discuss, because again, I can do this all day with Pacquiao. So we're going to talk about some key fights in his career, which quite frankly, there is a lot of them. So the first time that I myself caught eyes of this guy, Manny Pacquiao, was June 8th of 2002 on the undercard of the Tyson Lewis mega fight. Remember, we're talking, wow, we're coming up on 20 years of that fight. That was, I believe, and it still is the highest grossing fight, and I believe Mayweather, eventually, he eclipsed those numbers. But that fight was a fight that people wanted to see. So, of course, on the undercard, you have this small guy from the Philippines with a beaming smile coming to the ring and knocking guys out. That was a TKO in the second round against Jorge Julio. What really made me take notice, and I think the rest of the boxing world take notice of who Manny Pacquiao was a thorough, dominant TKO victory in the 11th round in November of 2003 against one of my all-time favorite fighters, Marco Antonio Barrera. Now, this is the Marco Antonio Barrera who has already beaten Prince Nassim Hamed, already beaten Erik Morales. And for him to thoroughly dominate Barrera, and we give Barrera credit as the established star in the featherweight division, and then willing to take on the young up-and-coming fighter, I give Barrera all the credit in the world, and he ran into a buzzsaw. The very next fight, May of 2004, a split draw against Juan Manuel Marquez. Folks, I've mentioned this before. Go back and watch that fight. That's truly one of the greatest featherweight fights of all time. Pacquiao comes out, scores 3 knockdowns in the first round. You would have thought that Marquez would have been out of there. He adjusted. You can make an argument he actually won more rounds than Pacquiao did. But of course, Pacquiao had the early advantage. Had one of the judges scored that first round properly, Manny would have won that fight. March of 2005, a unanimous decision loss 2-1 to Erik Morales, who was also tied for number 9 as one of my all-time favorite fighters that I grew up watching. Now, this is putting this fight into perspective. Erik Morales was fresh off of his loss in the trilogy to Marco Antonio Barrera. He already knew that Pacquiao already dominated Barrera. So I think Morales trying to make a statement, trying to cleanse, erase, neutralize, and minimize losing 2 out of 3 to Barrera, takes a fight versus Pacquiao, knowing that Pacquiao dominated Barrera, and it was a clear unanimous decision for one Erik Morales. September 2005, a TKO in the 6th round versus Hector Velasquez. January of 2006, a TKO in the 10th round in the rematch versus Erik Morales. Now, Erik Morales was winning that fight. Then as Pacquiao turned the heat, really applied the pressure, and I was shocked the fact that Pacquiao knocked out Erik Morales. July of 2006, a unanimous decision victory against Oscar Larios, a KO in the rubber match against Erik Morales, a KO in the 8th round, April of 2007 against Jorge Solis. October of 2007, a unanimous decision victory in the rematch versus Marco Antonio Barrera. March of 2008, a split decision victory against Juan Manuel Marquez. Some people feel that Marquez won the fight, but we're not going to get too into that. June of 2008, a TKO victory in the 9th round against David Diaz. And let me go back to the Marquez fights. You talk about guys who are evenly matched. You have the aggression of Pacquiao, the counter punching of Marquez, knockdowns here and there, great fights. Now, the fight that really put Pacquiao on the map, because again, he was known amongst hardcore boxing fans like myself and other people on Twitter, and some of you listening, but the fight that really put him on the map in terms of mainstream success was a thorough thrashing of Oscar De La Hoya, the Golden Boy, December of 2008. Now, De La Hoya was an older fighter. He decided to drop all the way back down to the welterweight division. And folks, Manny Pacquiao beat this man. It was so bad, even Freddie Roach in the corner, his trainer was telling him, go finish this man, because it was really that bad. And considering the height difference between Pacquiao and De La Hoya, which is funny seeing the stare down in the ring, and Pacquiao, I mean, just a complete annihilation, which was Oscar De La Hoya's last fight until this farce that he's going to step back into the ring against mixed martial arts champion Vitor Belfort. May of 2009, a thorough destruction of one Ricky Hatton, KO in the 2nd round, and I'm talking about Ricky Hatton was asleep. I mean, a thorough dominating performance. November of 2009, which I always say is one of Pacquiao's greatest victories, a thorough dominant TKO in the 12th round against Miguel Cotto. And this is really beating Cotto from pillar to post, scoring knockdowns, I believe, in the 2nd round, and finally a TKO in the 12th round. And this is a Miguel Cotto who eventually moved on and moved up and won the middleweight championship of the world. So that victory to me is one of Pacquiao's greatest victories. March of 2010, a unanimous decision victory against Joshua Clottey. November of 2010, a unanimous decision victory against Antonio Margarito. May of 2007, a unanimous decision victory against Shane Mosley. November of 2011, a majority decision again against Juan Manuel Marquez. A disgusting awful decision, a split decision loss against Timothy Bradley, June of 2008. A KO in the 6th round in the 4th fight, December of 2012 against Juan Manuel Marquez. Brandon Rios, November of 2013, a unanimous decision in his comeback fight, defeats Timothy Bradley in the rematch, April of 2014. November of 2014, a unanimous decision victory against Chris Algieri, which set him up for the all-time mega fight versus Floyd Mayweather, resulted in a unanimous decision loss. May of 2015. April of 2016, another thorough decision over Timothy Bradley. November 2016, a unanimous decision against Jesse Vargas. July of 2017, an awful, folks, and I mean awful decision loss to Jeff Horn, where clearly Pacquiao won that fight. July of 2018, a TKO victory in the 7th round against Lucas Matisse. January of 2019, a unanimous decision victory against Adrian Broner. Yes, that Adrian Broner, we'll leave that alone. July of 2019, in his last fight, a split decision win against Keith Thurman. Now let's discuss this fight for a little bit. Keith Thurman, along with guys like Errol Spence, was really seen as the future of the welterweight division. I'm talking about, this is post Floyd Mayweather, again, the star of that division. And really, there was always a push to find the next big star, because welterweights, along with heavyweights and as well as middleweights, they always are seen as a glamour division, because why? Some of the biggest stars in boxing history come from those divisions. If you look at heavyweight, you can go to Muhammad Ali, you can go to Jack Johnson, you can go to Mike Tyson, you can go to George Foreman, you can go to Lennox Lewis. If you think of middleweights, you think of the late, great Marvin Hagler, you think of Jake LaMotta, eventually Sugar Ray Robinson, you think of Harry Greb, you think of Carlos Monzon, you think of Bernard Hopkins. If you think of welterweights, you think of Sugar Ray Leonard, Sugar Ray Robinson, Thomas the Hitman Hearns, Roberto Duran, Oscar De La Hoya, Shane Mosley. So, and of course, I'm probably forgetting some name, Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker. So you think of Floyd Mayweather. So you think of welterweights as a glamour division. So as Mayweather had rode off into the sunset, Pacquiao got older, there was this big push to find out who was the next big welterweight star. And Keith Thurman, through victories over Danny Swift Garcia, over Sean Porter, and a lot of people's eyes, was seen as the best young welterweight of this new era. And Manny Pacquiao really beat up Keith Thurman. I'm talking about scores of knockdown in the 1st round. We actually covered that fight, and that's going to be in our 2nd broadcast, so please check the archives. And even though it was a split decision victory, it really should have been a unanimous decision victory, because I don't see how the hell one of those judges scored that fight for Keith Thurman. So again, Pacquiao has not had a fight in 2 years, and we know the biggest reason why was because of COVID. So of course, everything slowed down. So now this brings us to the fight versus Errol Spence Jr. Now, folks, when I talk about this is a generational fight, let this sink in. Errol Spence made his professional debut November of 2012. All right? So November of 2012, Errol Spence made his professional debut. Before Errol Spence made his professional debut, let me give you the list of names that Manny Pacquiao had already beaten by the time that Errol Spence made his professional debut. Juan Manuel Marquez, Shane Mosley, Antonio Margarito, Miguel Cotto, Ricky Hatton, Oscar De La Hoya, Marco Antonio Barrera, Eric Morales. And ladies and gentlemen, these are decisions over Marquez twice, over Barrera twice, over Morales twice. Thorough dominant victories over Hatton and Oscar De La Hoya. So that just goes to show you this truly is a generational fight. But let's really break down some key fights in the career of one Errol Spence. May of 2017, going to London, England, and thoroughly dominating the IBF welterweight champion of the world, Kell Brook. Now, some people might want to take the credit away from Errol Spence because it's the same Kell Brook who, ill-advised, decided to move up in weight and challenge middleweight champion Gennady Golovkin, which was a total beatdown. So some people might feel that maybe Kell Brook was a little bit of a shot fighter, a little bit shop worn by the time Errol Spence got to him. But for Errol Spence to take his talents and go across the pond to England and the man's home country and thoroughly dominate the man, because we know that in England, not saying anything bad about the British, but they have given some questionable decisions when it comes to an American fighter fighting a British champion on their soil. So for Errol Spence to go to that man's home country and thoroughly dominate that man, I think it really caught a lot of people's attention to who Errol Spence was. In his first title defense, June of 2018, just beat the heck out of Lamont Peterson where they had to stop the fight. I mean, this kid was just throwing, beat the brakes off of him. March of 2019, a unanimous decision victory against Mikey Garcia, who is actually moving up in weight to fight one Errol Spence. So again, we're talking about from the lightweight division, fighting Errol Spence in the welterweight division, and it was a complete shutout. Again, but fighting a smaller fighter. Sean Porter, September 2019, a split decision in a very tough fight. Now, Sean Porter is not the most aesthetically pleasing fighter. I'm not going to say he's not technically sound. He's a great athlete because he's played football. He's a great athlete. He has tremendous work ethic, tremendous conditioning. He never takes a back seat. He's in your face, and he just brings a lot of energy. And I thought that was a tough fight for Errol Spence. I thought he did enough to win that fight. Scores a knockdown, I believe, in the 11th or the 12th round, and really sealed the deal. But Sean Porter brings it, and it truly was a great fight. And I think that started getting a lot of people's attention on Errol Spence, because keep this in mind, Sean Porter, of course, being an announcer on the premier boxing channel or for Fox or whatever the case may be, he had, I think, more mainstream exposure than Errol Spence did. I think Errol Spence taking that fight has now really caught him on to a lot of casual fans, mainstream fans. Us hardcore fans, we know who he is now stepping into the mainstream. Unfortunately, after that fight, Errol Spence involved in a very bad car accident when he's thrown from a vehicle. So we know partying at that time, maybe the biggest victory of his career, was thrown from a car for DUI. He was in a hospital. And of course, people really didn't think could Errol Spence be the same again. And December of 2020, a virtual shutout against the aforementioned Danny Swift Garcia. Now, even when that fight was made, people figured that Danny Garcia was going to give Errol Spence a tough time. And the reason why, because Danny Garcia is a fundamentally sound fighter, great, solid skill set. And we're talking about Errol Spence, who's coming from the car accident. And if you want to Google those photos of what he looked like in the hospital, he didn't look good at all. And it was concerned, could he get to that level of fighter that he was before the car accident? And I believe that fight answered all those questions. So Errol Spence stands 5 feet 9 inches in height with a record of 27 wins, and he's totally undefeated, and he has 21 KOs. Now it sets him up to the fight versus Manny Pacquiao. My thing is this. If I go back and look at that Keith Thurman fight, here's why we're gonna choose Spence. So let's get it out the way. We're gonna choose Errol Spence because this is not to take anything away from Pacquiao. And like I was telling people from Twitter or on Twitter, if Spence were to win this fight, because there's this thought that's being pushed now that if Pacquiao wins, he should be considered one of the greatest fighters of all time. He already is. But there are people who are saying that if Pacquiao beats Spence, who is now again seen as the best welterweight, if he beats Spence, that pushes his legacy even further than Mayweather. He has a greater legacy than Mayweather. On top, so he's essentially beat the top 2 welterweights of this new generation. So that's what people are saying. And if that's how they want to feel, I don't have a problem with that. The question that I raised to somebody on Twitter was, if Pacquiao loses the fight, are you going to give Spence the same credit that you would give Pacquiao? I don't want to hear that Pacquiao was old, because if you're picking Pacquiao to win the fight, or if you're saying that if Pacquiao wins the fight, his legacy is greater than Mayweather's, his legacy even moves up. If that's how you feel, and that's a fair point to make, but by that same token, the very things that you can use to build somebody up, you can use the same arguments to tear someone down. And it's not about trying to tear Pacquiao down. The question that I asked people was, are you going to give Errol Spence the credit if he beats Manny Pacquiao? I don't want to minimize. I don't want to lessen by now falling back to the argument, well, Pacquiao was 40-some years old and he hadn't fought in 2 years. Your bread can be buttered on both sides. Now, the reason why we're picking Errol Spence, this has nothing to do with Pacquiao. It's simply just father time. When I go back and I watch that Keith Thurman fight, Pacquiao, he had his moments. However, he fought in spurts. He fought in a lot of spurts in that fight, where there were times where Thurman had him trapped against the ropes and was throwing and landing. And because Pacquiao was hit a lot in that fight, he fought in spurts. Now, the question is, can he fight in enough spurts to win enough rounds? Because remember, it's about winning rounds. And asked the great Sugar Ray Leonard in the fight versus Marvin Hagler, can you do enough in spurts to win the round? So that's going to be the ultimate question. Skill-wise, Pacquiao still has the punch power, because they said punching power is the last thing to go. Of course, he's a little slower, and the reason why he fights in spurts now, he doesn't have the sustained attack that he had, obviously, in his younger years and his prime. It was literally almost just 3 rounds of fury when you fought Pacquiao. And he's not that fighter anymore. Again, he's 42 years old, even though age has really, it slowed him down just a little bit. He's still a marvel for a guy his age, but he is much slower. And that's okay. That's what Father Time does to us. Can he do enough to win rounds, to win the rounds, to win enough rounds to win this fight? Errol Spence has solid footwork. Pacquiao is faster, but Spence does hit hard. Now, he doesn't have that knockout crushing power that Pacquiao does, but Spence does hit hard enough. Now, I think this fight is going to be really up close in the pocket. Now, it depends on how Pacquiao wants to fight this fight. Because if Pacquiao wants to move in and out and fight in spurts and do enough to win rounds, he has a good shot. Now, if the fight stays up close and personal, because Errol Spence is a good enough fighter where he can mix up his attack. He's good up close. He's good with body punches. He throws a beautiful left uppercut and throws a left hand. So these are going to be two southpaws who I can see a toe-to-toe matchup, because Pacquiao, even though he has beautiful footwork, and with him sometimes it's like poetry in motion, like the way he moves and ducks and slips out the way, at his heart, he prefers to stand toe-to-toe, and that's the funny part. Great boxer, lightning fast, lightning reflexes, but when push comes to shove, he likes to get in there and bang it out. That's what Errol Spence likes to do, and plus Errol Spence, being a taller fighter, will try to keep him at bay with his jab. Because again, if you go back to the Mayweather fight, that's how Mayweather pretty much beat Pacquiao, was keeping him at bay with the jab and occasional right hand to try to keep him honest. This time it's going to be Spence with the southpaw stance, as well as throwing tremendous uppercuts on the inside. If Manny comes charging in, I can see the uppercuts coming on the inside. So that's why we're picking Errol Spence to just do enough to win that fight. Again, it's not going to be an easy fight, because Pacquiao is going to have his moments. I can see Pacquiao actually winning a few rounds. So I don't expect it to be a total whitewash that somebody brought up in the terrible Terry Norris and Sugar Ray Leonard fight. I don't foresee that. I think Pacquiao is coming to bring it. He is going to give Errol Spence some fits, but I think time has slowed him down a little bit, and we do pick Errol Spence to win that fight. Now, let me say this. If Errol Spence wins that fight, it does not do anything to diminish Pacquiao's legacy. I'll even go on limb and say this. If Errol Spence knocks Pacquiao out in the first round, it still does not do anything to diminish Pacquiao's legacy. His legacy is already straight. He can only add to it. He cannot subtract from it. So even if Pacquiao goes out there and gets dropped, knocked unconscious in the first 30 seconds, it does not do anything in our mind to change anything that he's ever done. He has beaten Hall of Fame fighters, and you just cannot take that away from him. I'm still deciding if I'm going to have a small little get-together. I'm still having a big old fight party for the heavyweight championship of the world. Some of my people listening, I'm considering I might maybe throw some food on the grill. I'll keep you guys posted. But until the next time, it's Chin Check Radio signing out.